In Kenya, every household has tea every morning, and tea must have milk.
Africa isn't announcing its digital future with noise. It's building it quietly, piece by piece, far from the spotlight. And if you weren't paying attention to what happened in Conakry this year, you might have missed the moment the continent subtly shifted direction. For 3 days, heads of state, ministers, and innovators gathered not to repeat familiar speeches, but to shape a new reality. By 2030, Africa wants to function as a single digital market, not as a hopeful idea, but as a working system already underway. What made this summit feel different wasn't the scale of the event, but the seriousness in the room. People spoke like they had deadlines, not dreams. Projects were described as ongoing work, not future aspirations. You could sense that something had changed, not loudly, but decisively. And it forces a simple question. Is the world ready for a digitally unified Africa? Let's find out. For years, Africa has been discussing digital transformation. The conferences, strategies, and frameworks have been endless. But this time, the tone had changed. The 7th Transform Africa Summit didn't feel like another round of ideas. It felt like an engineering workshop. Ministries talked less about concepts and more about implementation. Technologists talked less about potential and more about prototypes. And Smart Africa, the organization leading this continental push, didn't behave like a think tank. It behaved like an institution executing a multi-year construction plan. The central message threaded through the summit, sometimes stated directly, sometimes implied between lines, was simple. By 2030, Africa intends to function as a single digital market. Not aims to, not hopes to, not could eventually, but intends. The intention wasn't expressed through dramatic slogans. It showed itself in the way officials explained timelines, the way project leaders described integration phases, and the way partners spoke of Africa not as 54 fragmented markets, but as one emerging digital bloc. Conakry was the first Francophone West African city to host this summit, and that location mattered. It showed the initiative wasn't being driven by a single region or a handful of digitally advanced countries. It was slowly becoming continental. When leaders from West, East, Central, Southern, and North Africa sit under the same roof and discuss digital identity, cross-border payments, unified data exchange, and AI governance with the same vocabulary, you begin to see the shape of something larger forming. What stood out most wasn't the optimism. It was maturity. Africa has reached a stage where digital ambition is no longer viewed as a luxury or optional upgrade. It's treated like infrastructure, just as essential as electricity, water, or roads. Speakers didn't waste time explaining why digital integration matters. Everyone already understood that part. The new focus was on how fast it could be done, what technical obstacles remain, and which partnerships can accelerate the process. Sanya, the platform connecting entrepreneurs and investors, wasn't presented as a future dream. It was described as a tool Africa needs immediately. The SADX pilot linking Rwanda, Ghana, and Benin wasn't introduced as an experiment. It was presented as a model that will be expanded. Digital ID wasn't framed as coming soon, but as a foundation being laid brick by brick. By the end of the summit, the message was impossible to miss. Africa is laying the groundwork for something bigger than individual national strategies. It is preparing to operate as a unified digital organism. But this naturally leads to another question. Where does this new confidence and clarity come from, and why now? The confidence you saw in Conakry didn't appear out of nowhere. It wasn't a sudden burst of optimism or a motivational moment. It was the result of something Africa hasn't had in a long time. Alignment. Quiet. Steady. Technical alignment. The kind that doesn't make headlines but changes everything once it starts taking shape. For years, African countries have worked on digital projects independently. Rwanda pushed digital identity. Kenya's advanced fintech. Ghana explored interoperability. Nigeria invested in startups. South Africa built cybersecurity frameworks. But these efforts moved like separate rivers, full of potential, but flowing in different directions. What Smart Africa has managed to do, slowly but persistently, is redirect these rivers toward a shared ocean. The alliance has evolved. A decade ago, it was mostly a space for conversations, declarations, and plans. Today, it operates more like an institution coordinating multiple construction sites across the continent. When a member state signs on, it isn't signing up for discussions, it's committing to alignment. And in Conakry, you could feel how deeply that alignment is beginning to take root. One of the clearest signs was how the new partnerships were framed. No one spoke in promotional language. People spoke like collaborators in a long-term project. The deal with Youth Connect, for example, wasn't introduced as a flashy youth initiative. It was described as a pipeline, preparing millions of young Africans for the digital economy they will soon inherit. The Visa partnership wasn't painted as a corporate breakthrough. It was a strategic layer in an emerging cross-border payment infrastructure. The digital solutions collaboration linking Rwanda, Benin, and Ghana wasn't a pilot for show. It was the first building block of a continental identity framework. This is what confidence born from alignment looks like: concrete steps instead of slogans. Another important shift is how African leaders now talk about digital sovereignty. A few years ago, the idea sounded aspirational. In Conakry, it sounded practical. Governments understand that digital tools built by others come with limitations. Identity systems are hosted elsewhere. Data stored externally. Payments are routed through foreign networks. These dependencies limit autonomy, and Africa is now treating them as vulnerabilities that need to be fixed, not eventually, but soon. Cybersecurity conversations, once peripheral, now sit at the center of policy. Digital skills programs, once scattered, are being harmonized. Even internet governance, an area Africa historically left to outside actors, is being reclaimed through initiatives that strengthen local control. But perhaps the biggest shift is psychological. African leaders no longer speak as if the continent must catch up to others. They speak as if Africa is designing its own path, one that doesn't copy Europe, Asia, or North America, but reflects its own population, its own needs, its own economic rhythm. That clarity creates confidence, not loud confidence, quiet confidence, the kind that makes progress feel inevitable rather than theoretical. And once African countries begin moving in the same direction, a new question naturally emerges. How will this alignment actually improve life for everyday Africans across the continent? When you strip away the policy language, the partnerships, and the strategy sheets, the single digital market comes down to one simple thing: making everyday life easier for millions of Africans who spend too much time fighting systems that should be working for them, not against them. For decades, Africa's biggest digital problem wasn't a lack of talent or ideas. It was friction. Little obstacles everywhere. A business that works in one country suddenly gets stuck in another. A mobile wallet accepted at home turns useless across a border. Government services that require long lines, long forms, or long explanations. It's exhausting, and everyone knows it. The promise of a single digital market is not to create some magical future where technology solves all problems. It's to remove that friction, quietly, consistently, practically. The kind of change you feel in your everyday routine, not just in national statistics. Take digital identity, for example. Today, moving between countries often means proving who you are over and over again, with different forms of ID, new registrations, and new systems to learn. A unified digital identity means you are recognized across borders, securely, instantly, and reliably. You don't think about it, it just works. The same goes for payments. The frustration of trying to send money across borders or trying to buy services in another African country is something almost everyone on the continent has experienced. A unified payment system removes that barrier. A phone number becomes a wallet becomes continental. And suddenly, what felt complicated starts feeling ordinary. For small businesses, the impact is even bigger. A seller in Lusaka shouldn't need to rebuild their entire business model just to reach customers in Harare or Johannesburg. A fashion designer in Accra shouldn't need 10 different platforms to serve a market that is just a few hours away. Once digital borders fall, the idea of exporting inside Africa becomes easier than it has ever been. A local business becomes a regional business without taking on the usual burden of bureaucracy and cost. And then there's access to services. Today, an entrepreneur might struggle to get information or support because the right system isn't available in their country. A single digital market fixes that. If Rwanda builds a world-class digital public service, Why shouldn't a citizen in Guinea benefit from it through interoperable platforms? Why should talent and opportunity be separated by lines drawn on a map decades ago? The biggest change, though, is psychological. When systems work smoothly, people behave differently, they think bigger, they plan further, they move with more confidence because the environment finally supports their ambition. That mindset shift, subtle but powerful, is what truly transforms economies.
One of the things that we're really struck by is there is a challenge in our healthcare system today. Some of it is access to medicine, some of it is making sure the medicine you do actually receive is legitimate. And we believe through technology, we can help address.
But as life becomes simpler within the continent, something else starts happening beyond it. When Africa begins removing its internal barriers, the external world starts paying closer attention, which raises the next question. How are global powers reacting to a continent that is becoming digitally connected and increasingly self-reliant? Let's pause for a second to say big thank you to the Black Culture Diary community, where Black voices, stories, and legacies are preserved and amplified. By becoming a member, you're not just supporting the channel, you're becoming part of a powerful cultural movement. Let's continue. When a continent starts solving its internal problems, the external world always reacts, sometimes quietly, strategically, sometimes with a bit of discomfort. That's exactly what's happening now. As Africa begins removing digital friction, big players outside the continent are paying far more attention than before. Not because Africa is asking for approval, but because the balance of digital dependency is starting to shift. For years, Africa relied heavily on foreign-built systems, payment rails, cloud infrastructure, cybersecurity frameworks, identity tools, and even basic software used to run government services. These systems weren't necessarily bad. Many were useful. But they came with limitations. Data stored overseas, rules written elsewhere, pricing controlled internationally, and digital policies shaped with outside interests in mind. And as long as African countries weren't aligned, those limitations stayed invisible. They aren't invisible anymore. The moment countries began coordinating digital identity, linking data exchange systems, and merging payment frameworks, the global tech landscape felt it. You can see it in how foreign companies now compete harder for African partnerships. You can hear it in the shift of vocabulary, words like collaboration, co-creation, and joint development appearing far more often. You notice it when global conferences suddenly feature Africa in sessions that previously never included the continent. None of this is accidental. The world knows what a unified digital Africa represents, the largest young population on Earth stepping into a shared digital space, a market bigger than the EU beginning to form, an innovation ecosystem not shaped by external donors but built on African priorities. Naturally, this creates a mix of reactions. Some countries see opportunity. They recognize that a stable, harmonized African digital market is good for global business. It means clearer rules, predictable systems, and proper digital infrastructure. These actors are leaning in. They want long-term partnerships. They understand Africa isn't a risk anymore. It's a serious digital frontier. Others, however, are more cautious. A continent that controls its own digital identity, data, and cybersecurity is less dependent, less influenceable, less open to external pressure. For decades, Africa's fragmented digital environment made it easier for foreign actors to operate country by country, shaping policies through bilateral deals. A unified structure changes that. It compresses negotiation space. It alters power dynamics. Some countries worry that Africa's new sovereignty will make their own digital interests harder to impose. Others fear that as Africa harmonizes, it will gravitate toward partners who respect sovereignty more, especially emerging digital powers that offer infrastructure without political conditions. But the most interesting reaction is the quiet one. Global institutions suddenly beginning to frame Africa as an equal digital participant rather than a technology consumer. You see this shift slowly but unmistakably. Africa isn't being spoken about as a market to develop. It's being discussed as a partner to integrate with. The world is adjusting, some eagerly, some reluctantly, but everyone is noticing. And once you understand that, the next question becomes obvious. If the world is reacting this strongly already, what will Africa's digital landscape actually look like by the time 2030 arrives? Here's a reminder to please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on Black culture, history, civilization, and identity. Let's continue now. If you project Africa's current direction forward, even conservatively, the continent in 2030 doesn't look like the Africa most people imagine today. It looks more organized, more synchronized, and more internally connected than at any point in modern history. Not perfect, not uniform, but coherent, and that coherence is what changes everything. Start with the basics. A unified digital identity system across a large portion of the continent means movement becomes simpler. Verification becomes faster. Services become less tied to geography. We're talking about a situation where a person from Ghana can authenticate themselves in Rwanda with the same ease they do at home, or where a business incorporated in Dakar can operate across multiple countries without reinventing its entire administrative structure every time. This may sound subtle, but it's the kind of infrastructure that quietly transforms how people live and work. Then there's the digital economy. In 2030, an African startup won't be thinking, how do we enter a new country? It will be thinking, which part of the continental market should we scale to first? The psychological shift alone is immense. When entrepreneurs feel the continent opening instead of closing, their ambitions change shape. You stop designing for a city or a region. You design for a billion-person market, and that encourages products, services, apps, and platforms that are bigger, smarter, and more resilient. Payments will feel different too, not overnight, but gradually. Every year, more systems will connect, more currencies will integrate, and more digital tools will work across borders without friction. A baker in Dar es Salaam will sell to customers in Lusaka without treating it like a complicated international operation. A freelance designer in Nairobi will get paid by a client in Abidjan with the same ease as receiving a local transfer. This isn't theory, it's already happening in fragments. The single digital market simply scales it up. By 2030, governments will also behave differently. Policymaking won't be as isolated. If Kenya creates an effective framework for AI governance, there's no reason that structure can't be replicated in Malawi or Guinea or Botswana. If Rwanda develops a strong cybersecurity protocol, it can become a continental template. Instead of 50 different experiments running at once, you get a shared library of working systems, each country improving what others have already built. The education and talent pipeline will adjust as well. Digital skills won't be taught only for local use, but for continental opportunities. A young African learning software development, artificial intelligence, or cloud architecture will be stepping into a job market that spans from Lagos to Kigali to Casablanca to Cape Town. The pathways widen, not because borders disappear, but because systems begin to talk to one another. And perhaps the strongest change in 2030 will be confidence. A continent that once saw itself through the lens of global dependence will begin acting like a region shaping its own digital architecture. That shift, internal, psychological, cultural, may be the most transformative of all. But if Africa becomes this cohesive and digitally capable, by 2030, the bigger question begins to form. What happens globally when Africa finally activates its single digital market and starts negotiating with the world as a unified digital power? If everything continues on its current trajectory, the moment Africa activates its single digital market will feel less like a sudden event and more like a quiet turning point, the kind people only recognize fully when they look back years later. There won't be fireworks or a dramatic announcement. Instead, the world will gradually realize something has shifted. Africa won't be speaking as 54 digital fragments anymore, but as a coordinated digital force with momentum, structure, and leverage. That leverage matters. For decades, global negotiations involving Africa, whether in trade, technology, data governance, or investment, have been shaped by fragmentation. Companies could enter one market and use that foothold to influence another. Governments could strike bilateral deals that benefited one state while bypassing others. Digital standards varied widely, creating loopholes that gave foreign actors more control than the continent often realized. A single market changes that dynamic immediately. When infrastructure, identity, payment systems, and data frameworks become interoperable, Africa gains negotiating power it never had before. Consider what that means in practice. A global tech company trying to influence data policy in one African country will now face a continent-wide framework instead of a single national decision. A foreign telecom operator can't play countries against each other for market access if licensing systems are aligned and harmonized. A payment company seeking dominance must now integrate with a continental system, not just pick a few markets and ignore the rest. The advantage shifts quietly but decisively toward Africa. Investors will feel the shift too. Previously, entering African markets required navigating a maze of regulations, currencies, and disjointed infrastructures. A unified digital market makes investment more predictable, less risky, and far more scalable. Instead of funding a startup that serves one city or one region, investors get a company serving an entire continent. That alone changes how global capital flows into African innovation ecosystems. Geopolitically, the implications are even broader. Africa will no longer be seen simply as a place where digital tools are deployed by global powers. It becomes a developer, regulator, and exporter of its own systems. Countries that once approached Africa as a consumer market will have to adjust, recognizing that the continent is now shaping digital norms, not just adopting them. And that recognition comes with respect, the kind that isn't given freely, but earned through structure, scale, and coherence. The psychological shift inside the continent may be the most important of all. Africans will increasingly see themselves as part of a functioning whole, not isolated national economies. Young professionals will feel the possibilities of a borderless digital environment rather than the constraints of narrow markets. Businesses will think continent first, not country first. Governments will approach policy with a broader vision, and this collective mindset, once formed, becomes hard to reverse.
So what we need is more strong government support in order to activate entrepreneurship. Then we need more corporate collaboration in order to work with venture capital funds to solve corporate challenges and digitization so that we can invest in the companies that solve their problems.
In many ways, Africa won't announce its arrival as a digital power. It will simply become one, through consistency, through alignment, through architecture built steadily over time. And when that moment arrives, when the systems finally connect, when the borders soften digitally, when the infrastructure begins to hum across regions, one question will echo far beyond Africa's borders. How will the rest of the world adjust to an Africa that negotiates, innovates, and operates as a unified digital giant rather than a fragmented set of markets? Because at that point, the shift won't be coming. It will already be here. Do you think Africa is finally ready to act as one digital market? Let us know in the comments section, which country do you believe will benefit the most from this transformation? Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If so, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We have decided to bring videos on something nobody talks about: the Black culture, civilization, history, and evidence about how glorious Blacks have been. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.